In this episode, we're going to take hashing, one of the most frequently misunderstood cryptography concepts, and make it feel crisp and reliable in your mind. Beginners often lump hashing in with encryption because both involve transforming data, but hashing is not meant to be reversible, and that difference changes what it's useful for. Hashing is about creating a digest, a fixed-length fingerprint of data, so you can detect changes and compare values efficiently. When hashing is used correctly, it supports integrity checks, safe password storage, and message authentication, but when it's used incorrectly, it creates a dangerous false sense of security. That false confidence shows up in real incidents, like systems that store passwords with weak hashing practices or systems that claim integrity protection but can be tampered with easily. We're going to focus on what digests really represent, why salts matter for passwords, how HMAC works for integrity and authenticity, and the common misuse patterns that break security even when the math looks impressive. A good place to start is to define a cryptographic hash function in plain language. A hash function takes an input of any length, like a file, a message, or a password, and produces a fixed-length output called a digest. A key property is that small changes in the input should cause large, unpredictable changes in the digest, which makes the digest useful for detecting modification. Another key property is that it should be computationally infeasible to reverse the digest to recover the original input, and it should be infeasible to find two different inputs that produce the same digest in a way that undermines security. These properties are what make hashing suitable for integrity and comparison tasks, not secrecy tasks. A common beginner mistake is assuming that because a digest looks scrambled, it provides confidentiality, but it doesn't, because hashing is one way and does not allow controlled decryption. Instead, hashing provides a way to check whether data has changed and to represent data compactly. Once you see hashing as fingerprinting rather than hiding, its role becomes much clearer. Digests are commonly used for integrity checks, where you want to know whether a file or message has been altered. The basic idea is that if you compute a digest for a piece of data and later compute it again, matching digests suggest the data is unchanged. This can be useful for verifying that a downloaded file matches what the publisher intended, or for detecting corruption in stored data. The trap here is that a digest by itself does not tell you who created it, and it does not prevent an attacker from replacing both the file and the digest. If an attacker can tamper with the place where you retrieve the digest, they can provide a malicious file and a matching malicious digest. This is why integrity checks often require an additional trust mechanism, such as digital signatures or message authentication, to ensure the digest itself is trustworthy. Beginners sometimes think that publishing a digest is enough to guarantee safety, but safety depends on whether you trust the source of the digest. A digest is evidence of sameness, not proof of legitimacy, unless it is protected by a stronger trust mechanism. Hashing becomes especially important in password storage, and this is where salts play a critical role. When a system stores a password, it should not store the actual password, and it should not store an encrypted version that can be decrypted later. Instead, it should store a hash of the password, so that when a user logs in, the system hashes what the user typed and compares it to the stored digest. Because hashing is one way, a thief who steals the stored digests cannot simply reverse them to get the passwords. However, attackers can still guess passwords by hashing common guesses and comparing the results, and this is where salts matter. A salt is a unique random value added to each password before hashing, so that the same password does not produce the same digest across different accounts. This defeats large-scale precomputed attacks, where attackers use massive lookup tables of common password digests. The key beginner lesson is that salting does not make weak passwords strong, but it makes attacks far less efficient and far less scalable. Salts also help solve a problem that surprises beginners. Two users choosing the same password can create identical digests if no salt is used. That is dangerous because it reveals patterns to attackers and makes cracking easier, since breaking one digest can break many. With a unique salt per password, those identical passwords produce different digests, which hides the pattern and forces attackers to work separately on each account. This is a major reason modern password storage guidance insists on unique salts. Another important point is that salts are not secret. They can be stored alongside the digest, because their purpose is uniqueness, not secrecy. The real security comes from the one-way hashing and the work factor, meaning how expensive it is to compute each guess. That's why password hashing often uses slow, deliberately expensive hashing approaches rather than fast general-purpose hashing, because speed helps attackers. Beginners often assume faster is better, but for password hashing, faster is worse because it makes guessing cheaper. Salts and work factors together are what make password hashing robust. Now let's introduce HMAC, which stands for Hash-Based Message Authentication Code, HMAC, and this is one of the most practical integrity tools in real systems. A digest alone can detect change, but it cannot prove who created the digest, because anyone can compute a digest for any data. HMAC solves that by combining a cryptographic hash function with a secret key. The result is a tag that can be verified only by someone who also knows the key, which means it provides both integrity and authenticity for messages between parties who share that key. If an attacker modifies the message, they cannot produce a valid HMAC tag without the key, so tampering becomes detectable and not easily forgeable. This is extremely useful in network protocols, application messaging, and data integrity workflows where symmetric trust exists. The beginner takeaway is that HMAC is not encryption because it does not hide content, but it makes content tamper-evident and origin verifiable for trusted parties. It is a way to say this message came from someone with the shared secret and has not changed since they created the tag. A common misuse pattern is assuming that hashing a message provides integrity against an attacker who can intercept traffic. If you send a message with a plain digest, an attacker can change the message and recompute the digest, and the receiver will still see a match. That provides no real protection in a hostile environment. Another misuse is using a hash as if it were a password storage method without salts or without an appropriate slow hashing approach, which makes password cracking much easier. Yet another misuse is using a fixed, hard-coded salt shared across all passwords, which is better than no salt, but still allows attackers to build targeted tables for that salt. The core lesson is that correct hashing is contextual. The digest alone is useful for detecting accidental change in data you already trust, but it is not a security control against active adversaries unless combined with keying or signatures. When people ignore that difference, they build systems that appear cryptographically sophisticated but are functionally weak. Security fails not because hashing is broken, but because its purpose is misunderstood. Another place false confidence appears is when people confuse integrity with safety. If you verify that a file has not changed, that does not mean the file is safe. It only means it is the same file you expected. If the expected file is itself malicious, integrity checks do nothing to protect you. Even if the file is legitimate, it might contain vulnerabilities, and integrity verification won't reveal that either. Integrity is a property of sameness, not a property of goodness. This distinction matters because people sometimes treat checksums like a malware scan, and they are not. Checksums and digests can help you ensure you received exactly what was sent, but they do not evaluate whether what was sent is trustworthy or safe. This is another reason why trust chains and signatures matter when distributing software. The hash can support integrity, but the signature supports authenticity, and neither one replaces vulnerability management and safe software practices. Beginners gain confidence when they keep these roles distinct rather than treating cryptography as a one-step safety label. It's also important to understand how hashing relates to digital signatures, because signatures often rely on hashes internally. When signing large data, a system typically computes a hash of the data and then signs that digest rather than signing the entire data directly, which is more efficient and fits the mathematical structure of many signature schemes. This means that hash properties like collision resistance matter because if an attacker could create two different messages with the same digest, they might trick a signature system into endorsing one message while presenting another. While we're not getting into algorithm specifics here, the beginner lesson is that hashing is a foundational building block used inside many larger cryptographic constructions. That is why the security community cares about the strength of hash functions and why older or weakened hashes can create downstream risk in signature contexts. Hashing is not an isolated feature. It is a component that supports other security guarantees. Understanding its role helps you see why choices and updates in hashing matter beyond simple checksums. Trust remains a recurring theme, because even the best hashing practices can be undermined if the environment that uses them is not trustworthy. If an attacker controls the system that verifies hashes, they can make it accept anything by altering the verification process. If an attacker controls the distribution channel for both the file and the digest, they can swap both. If an attacker steals the secret key used for HMAC, they can forge tags and defeat message authentication. This is why hashing is part of a larger system that includes key management, secure channels, access controls, and monitoring. The strength of the hash function does not compensate for weak operational practices. Beginners sometimes want a single cryptographic silver bullet, but cryptography is always embedded in systems, and systems can fail around the cryptography. When you think in terms of goals and trust boundaries, you can evaluate whether hashing is being used in a way that truly delivers integrity or only appears to. As we conclude, remember the practical core of hashing and the mistakes that undermine it. A digest is a fixed-length fingerprint that helps detect change and compare values, but it does not provide confidentiality, and it does not prevent active attackers from tampering unless the digest is protected by trust mechanisms. Salts are critical for password hashing because they ensure identical passwords produce different digests, and they prevent efficient large-scale pre-computed cracking, especially when paired with slow, work factor-based hashing. Hash-based message authentication code, HMAC, adds a secret key to hashing so you can verify integrity and authenticity of messages between parties who share that key, making tampering detectable and forging difficult. Most hashing failures come from false confidence, such as using plain digests as if they were security against adversaries, storing unsalted password hashes, or treating integrity checks as proof of safety. When you keep the goals clear and the trust model honest, hashing becomes one of the most dependable tools in cryptography, and you can use it to strengthen systems without being fooled by superficial complexity.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.